Now that we have written out our simulation into our hard drive, now let's see how we can render our smoke simulation. And let's apply some, first we need to apply some material into our this simulation. And for that, I'm going to create a material library down here. Let's add this and connect this in here. So in here, you know that either we can create some material onto other material network. We need to go into the fill and define our material network, or we can just dive inside and start building our material. So let's dive inside, and in here we are in the Vex Builder context, which means we can start to build our material. And in here I'm going to create our Karma material builder. So let's go into the Karma. Here we have the Karma material builder, but we also have the material for the Pyro. So because we are working with the simulation, all of these simulation related material, or this explosion, fire and smoke material, are inside of this Pyro section. So in here, let's go into the Karma, Pyro, and in here we have this Karma cloud material if you are going to render your cloud. And we have the Karma Pyro explosion material if you are going to be rendering your explosion. We also have the fire material, and we also have this Pyro smoke material. Let's add the Pyro smoke material because I want to render my smoke simulation. And here we have the smoke material. Let me enable the parameter, and to actually access the parameter, it's a subnetwork. Here as you can see, it is written as a subnetwork, which means we need to dive inside to have access to the material itself. So let's dive inside, and now we are still in the Vex Builder, but now we have the access to this Karma Pyro shader. And here we have these properties. Let me move this down, and the inputs, we just don't need this, and let's delete this node. And in here, let's select our Pyro shader, that is our actual shader, and bring up its parameter. And in here, as you can see, we have this enable smoke option, and right now it is enabled. And first we have the density, which means I can adjust the density or this smoke. I can create thick or thin smoke by playing around with this density value. I have the option for the color. First, maybe let's assign this material. So let's go back onto this LopNet, and in here onto the material library, we need to click on this autofill material to fill out this slot. And so let's click on it, and now here you can see our Karma material builder has been imported. In here, I can just click on this assign to geometry to assign our material onto our geometry right here from the material library, or I can create a material linker. Let's add a material linker, and that is actually a preferred way of assigning the material. You need to connect the material linker, and in here bring up the parameter, and here we have the material list, and here we have the geometry list. And if I want to assign this, I can just click and drag onto my geometry. Now our this materials will get assigned to our this SOP import, or I can just remove this, and we also have option to assign this onto our geometry right here. So let's enable this, and I'm going to onto the geometry path, just click and drag onto this path, and this will going to be assigned. And now we need to create our render node. Right now we do not have any render node, but first let me create a light, because we need the light for creating to render our this smoke simulation. And for that I'm going to use a dome light in here. So let's add a dome light and connect this in between, and let's view the dome light. And in here I'm going to onto this texture slot, I'm going to select my HDRI. You can use any HDRI that you might have downloaded from the internet, but I'm going to use the default HDRI that came with Houdini. So let's click on this Houdini pick HDRI, and here we have these three HDRI that came default. I'm going to use this one, Skylight Garage, and hit accept. And here you can see our HDRI has been imported. Let me activate this view tool to adjust my camera angle. and in here I'm going to just select an A angle and create an A camera. And to create the camera from this current angle, come over here where it says no cam. Let's click on it, and in here just click on this new camera option to create the camera at the current angle. So let's click on this, and here as you can see our camera has been added. And in here I can activate my camera view tool, and when our view tool is active, and right now here as you can see we are using this camera 1, and into the node editor here as you can see our camera has been added and its name is set to camera 1, so which means we are looking through this camera 1, and this lock button is enabled, which means that if I were to enable my view tool and play around with my camera angle, this original camera location is going to be changed. And here as you can see onto the transform node of the camera, as I am moving, these values are changing, which means that I am interactively placing my camera. And if you are happy with the location, let me zoom out. Let's say I am happy with this camera angle. I can just uncheck this lock button, and what that will do, it will not adjust the camera position interactively, which means I can freely move around and my camera position will not going to be adjusted. And here I can see the camera in my viewport, that is the camera location. And if I want to look through this camera, I just come over here where it says no cam, click on it, and in here we need to just select our camera. Here as you can see cameras, camera 1. Let's click on it, and now we are looking through our camera. And if I were to adjust the angle, let me adjust this, and here as you can see we are not using any cam because we have changed our location and lock button was disabled, so which means we cannot adjust this position any longer interactively. That is good. Now all that we need to do is just create our Karma render node. So down here let's create a Karma node by typing the Karma. Let's add this, and when you create Karma, this will add these two nodes, this USD render, that is an essential node for rendering out your sequence, and that is the actual render settings. And we need to connect our input stage in here as well. And let me view this Karma render setting, and in here we can play around with the settings. I can change the engine. Right now we are using the CPU engine, so that is why we have these CPU parameters. I can change this to XPU, which means we are going to use the CPU plus our GPU to accelerate our rendering. So maybe let's use the XPU, and I'm going to look through my camera, and in here to actually render this with this Karma render node, I need to come over here where it says perspective. Let's click on it, and here as you can see we are right now using the Houdini VK, which means the Houdini Vulkan viewport. I can change this to Karma CPU or Karma XPU. I'm going to just click on this Karma XPU to render this smoke with the Karma XPU. And here as you can see we have this OptX. This OptX means that the GPU, and right now our shaders are compiling, which means all of our information is going to be stored into the GPU RAM. And when this compile has been done, we will see that our GPU will going to start render and we will see some acceleration. And right now it's compiling and we need to wait. It takes time at the very first frame, but when all of the information has been stored, once has been stored inside of GPU RAM, our simulation is going to be accelerated. And here as you can see, our simulation has been, our render has been done. Now I can just activate my view tool. I can interactively adjust my camera angle, and here as you can see my render speed has been increased. And right now our smoke is looking too dark, so maybe let's play around with the light. Let's go into the dome light, and in here I'm going to adjust the intensity or exposure. Maybe let's increase the light exposure, and let's go into the transform node and let's play around with the rotation. I want to rotate my HDRI onto my y-axis. Let's keep rotating this until we like the angle of our light. Now let's dive inside the material library to play around with the material setting. First, our this HDRI light in the background is very distracting. So let's disable this light in the viewport. And to disable this, we need to click on this I button, open display option. That will open your display option. And we need to go into the background. Here we have the settings related to our background. And in here, we have this option display environment light as background. So let's uncheck this, and that will hide our environment light as in a background. The light is there, but we are actually not visualizing in the viewport. We are hiding it. And now the color scheme. We are using the light scheme inside of Solaris. We can change this to dark, or maybe let's change this to dark gray. And now let's close this window. And same way, if you want to hide your grid, here you can see we are visualizing the grid. I can just click on this button that will hide the grid. And down here we have the guide for our light, this yellow dome, sorry, white color sphere. This white color sphere mean that is the indicator for the light. We have this dome light. So if you want to disable your guides for the lights, we have this option, that is the display light guides. Let's uncheck this. Now all of the guides has been gone. And if you want to create, let's say if I have multiple lights in here, I'm going to create a light node. And if I were to add this into my scene and play around with the position, and here as you can see, I have a guide for this light as well. And when we are going to create multiple lights, we will have all of the lights scattered around in our scene. And if it's going to be distracting, you can just click on this button. It will just hide the guides. So that's the guide visualizer. So let's view this from our camera angle, and maybe let's delete this light. We don't need this. And now let's dive inside the material library and onto the Karma Pyro smoke material. In here, let's play around with the material setting. First, we have the density scale. If you want to create thick smoke, you can play around with the density. Same way, if you lower the density, and here as you can see, I am creating thin smoke. Let's lower this value down to 0.1. And here as you can see, we have a lot thin smoke. Maybe let's change this to value of 1. And in here, we can play around with the smoke color. If I were to change this blue, and here as you can see, we have this blue color. I can continue playing around with my smoke color. I can make my smoke darker or lighter. And same way, we have the shadow. And right now, here as you can see, we have the density for our shadow. If you increase the shadow, we will get these darker shadows. And same way, I can lower this value down, this shadow density down, to create a more light these shadows. Now I can play around with my color. Let me adjust this overall color, and maybe lower down our shadow density. Let's lower this down to 0.2. And I'm going to play around with this overall smoke color, and also maybe increase our density to create a thicker smoke. And you can keep playing around with these pyro material, this smoke settings to your own liking. And in here we also have the shadow color, which means wherever we have the shadow, we have this darker color. I can change this to blue. Now we will get these blue shadows. And when you are happy with your result, I can go back. Let's say that I like the look of our material, of our simulation, and all of our this lighting. I can go into the Karma render setting. In here we have this output picture, and in here we can define the location where I want to store my image sequence, my render sequences. So let me pick up my location, and I'm going to go into this location. I'm going to go into the $hip in here. and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder render. Hit accept and hit accept in here. Sorry, we also need to define the name of the file. We have set the location, we have created the folder, and now we need to set the name. I'm going to name this one, let's say smoke underscore render. And whenever you are working with the animation, because we are going to store multiple frames, we have 50 frames, and whenever you are working with multiple frame, you need to add a unique identifier for the frame. Otherwise, when the render is going to happen, it's going to use this smoke render this name, and in the next frame when it's going to render next frame, it will still going to use this same name, smoke render, which means that we will going to be overwriting our previous frame. And to actually avoid this, to render all of these sequence separately, we must have a unique name. And to add the unique name, I can add the $F expression, capital F. This $F means the frame number. This expression will insert your current frame number. So $F means that because right now we are in the frame number 23. After that, the smoke render, we are going to add an A23 in here. So maybe after the smoke underscore render, I'm going to just add an A underscore in here. And after that, I'm going to use the $F, which means the unique identifier. And for the unique identifier, I'm using the frame number. So we will not going to overwrite our sequences. And now we need to set the extension. If you want to render out your EXR sequence, you can add the dot and the extension name. If you want to render EXR, just type EXR in here. And same way, if you want to render your PNG sequences, after the dot, you can type PNG in here, and Houdini will render them as a PNG sequence. And same way, if you want to render your basic JPEG, you can just change this to JPG and it will render out simple JPEG. I'm going to render the EXR sequences. So in here, I'm going to type .exr and hit accept. And now onto the output picture. Here as you can see, we are using this expression, the $, which means our current stored location or this current saved scene file location. And in here we have the render folder, and inside the render folder we are going to use the smoke render, and the $F means the current frame number, this sequence. And now down here we are using the resolution. You can change your resolution from here. You can click on this, and here we have some presets. If you want to render out your Trinity sequence, you can just pick, or if you want to render your 4K sequence, you can just click and pick. And now we are going to render our 4K sequences. I'm going to just keep this at default 1280 by 720. And now all of these settings has been set. Now we just need to render them. To render your sequences onto your hard drive, we need to come over here onto this USD render op. This render op is responsible for rendering out your sequence onto hard drive. And in here, we need to press render to disk option, and that will render out your sequences into your hard drive. And down here we have the valid frame range, and right now it's set to render current frame, which means that it's going to render single frame, the current frame. Right now we are at the frame number 24. It's going to just take the 24 frame and render this out, this single frame. If you want to render out your entire frame range, I can just click on it and change this to render specific frame range. Let's click on it, and now here we have the same option, and it is using this $F and this expression to take the information of our play bar, and we are right now using the 240 frames. And as you know, let me close this console in here. As you know, if you want to render out your strict frame range, either I can adjust my play bar, I can change this to 50 in here, and this will going to be changed also, or you can just delete this expression by clicking on this delete channel, And in here, you can manually type how many frame you want to render. Let's say I want to render 30 frame. You can type 30 and now it will render your first 30 frame. And just press on this render to disk option and it will going to be start rendering. And first we need to change this to Houdini VK, and which means that the Houdini Vulkan viewport, and make sure that you are not rendering inside of the viewport by the Karma XPU because it will slow down your render. So I'm going to just change this to viewport, which means we are not rendering, and going to press render to disk option and it will going to start render all of my sequences.